So final preseason game tonight. After we got off the air last night, the Eagles made some off-the-field news as they signed defensive end Stephen Means to a contract extension, and you write about that on our website at 973 ESPN. That looks like that also means then that Means is going to make the roster.
Yeah, it's pretty evident. They're going to keep 5 defensive ends, and you're not going to extend Stephen Means if you're going to cut him on Saturday. So that's a pretty good indication that he'll be beating out Alex McAllister, second-year player, was kind of stashed on injured reserve last year. And he'll make this football team. And perhaps Alex McAllister goes to the practice squad if he gets through waivers. But, you know, he's an interesting guy because he's 6'6", and he's got these really, really long arms. But he only weighs about 240 pounds. So the issue with him has always been, can he hold up and run support? And Stephen Means, hey, he's a hard-working guy. Every time he's on the field, he produces. And it's tough to cut guys like that. I mean, he just works so hard. He's a good player to have around the locker room.
What about the news today, John, that the Eagles are going to hire an offensive assistant in Trent Miles? Did that? What do you think that signals to the Eagles' housekeeping? Are they trying to just protect their stock, if you will, if coaches try to drift away again? What is the reported hiring? Because they haven't confirmed it yet, but it's on some other websites and some other places out there that Trent Miles is going to join as an offensive assistant.
Yeah, I don't know if that's anything of that nature. I think it's just somebody you like and you want to bring on to the staff. I don't know if there's all that much beyond it or anything that, you know, that much strategy to it. It's just sometimes you get guys you like and you want to bring them on to the organization.
And then the last thing that happened after we got off the air with you yesterday, but before we came in to talk to you again today, is that they've elected David Akers into their Eagles Hall of Fame. Worthy of that honor, in your opinion?
You know, I do think he's worthy, but there's kind of two arguments to that. While I think he's worthy, there's other guys that have been waiting longer that are probably more worthy. And Seth Joyner would be the first name I would come across. Simmons would be in that category as well. And I know a lot of the guys who've been covering this team for a really long time. Mark Eckel, who's retired, is an example. Reuben Frank, who's been around covering the Eagles for a very long time. Kind of look at the organization now, and they don't really look at the organization before they arrive and realize sort of what those players meant to this team. But while I say that, hey, David Akers was a tremendous kicker, was an all-decade player team, player in the NFL for the 2000s, clearly the best kicker in franchise history. So I don't have a problem with him going in.
John McMullen, we're talking with our 97.3 ESPN.com Eagles insider on his way up to the Eagles-Jets game, which you can hear tonight. Pre-game coverage starts at 6. Then Mel Reese and Mike Vick have the call at 7 here on 97.3 ESPN. John, what are some of the specific position battles on the offensive side of the ball? We know about running back and wide receiver. Are those the two that you're really zeroing in on?
Yeah, they are. I mean, you have to. I think the back end of the receiver rotation, it's been well documented all summer. So this is the last sort of hurdle for guys to make a case to make the roster. And then a running back, a lot of people will tell you this is a seminal moment for Corey Sutton. And I don't know if I believe that, but he's put himself in the conversation. I will say that. And running back is a position I think the Eagles have to be concerned with, to be blunt. And I think it's one of those things where, you know, you saw Joe Hayden kind of bounce from Cleveland to Pittsburgh. And I mentioned yesterday, you see this intra-division movement all the time. And you look down sort of the I-95 corridor, see Matt Jones and Rob Kelly in Washington. I could see the running back position being one where the Eagles go outside the organization because I've been saying it for a while. Donnell Pumphrey is not ready to be an NFL player. I don't know if Corey Clement is either. But I will say this. If I needed one to play tomorrow, I'd rather have Corey Clement.
Is Matt Jones a guy from Washington, maybe somebody that they would go pursue if he gets cut in Washington?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I mean, there's some speculation that he will be cut, or Rob Kelly, someone from that Washington backfield. And, yeah, I mean, they're better than what the Eagles have. So I think certainly if you're Philadelphia and you have a need at that particular position, I think it's a pretty good idea to look at a player like that.
John, you mentioned Pumphrey not being ready. You and I had talked about a week or two ago about the fact that, maybe Pumphrey is a guy who you bury on the IR just because maybe you want to put somebody else on the roster. Do you think that's still an option for them, considering that they did that with Alex McAllister last year?
Yeah, I definitely do. I think it's an option with Nate Gary as well, who's got a hamstring injury. I think that's a possibility that they stash him on injured reserve. And even Pumphrey more so. I think maybe you'll kind of see, if you see an ankle injury, if you see a hamstring, you can kind of indicate that might be what's going on with Donnell Pumphrey, because, as I said, it's pretty evident that he's not ready to play at this particular stage. And you don't want to lose him because he does have talent. So from that standpoint, I think it's a very good chance of it happening. If it doesn't happen, the Eagles will probably keep him, no question about that. But then you're going to have to put him on the 53-man roster, and at that point, it becomes you can't dress him, so you're wasting a roster spot each week.
John McMullen with us. Roster competitions we're talking about, and obviously running back, receiver. We mentioned the safety position there. There's some competition at backup linebacker and competition at defensive tackle, John. Let's look at those two positions, linebacker and defensive tackle. Let's go D-tackle first and how you see that breaking down.
Well, I think the most interesting name there is Elijah Qualls, the 6th-round pick. And I think he's shown enough. He hasn't been the best practice player, but he kind of does some things in the games that you like. And he's got the ability to play nose tackle. He's got the ability to play under tackle. So you like that versatility as well. Ultimately, I think the Eagles are going to keep 10 defensive linemen. And if that's the case, I think Qualls is going to make this football team. But other guys have shown up. Justin Hamilton is a name you don't think about, is a name people don't talk about a lot, but he's played well. I think he's put himself in the conversation. Destiny Vallejo, the Eagles are very, very high on. And remember, Bo Allen is back. So ultimately, I think you have those four that are going to be there. Fletcher Cox, Tim Jernigan, Bo Allen, Destiny Vallejo. I think Elijah Qualls ends up being the 5th one.
So 5 D tackles, says John McMullen. So then how many linebackers?
Well, I think they're going to keep 6 linebackers. And the question is, can you keep Nate Gary? And can you keep Camus Grugier-Hill, who's a very good special teams player? I'm not sure you can keep them both. And the fact that Gary comes up with the hamstring, you have to start talking about perhaps he's another guy who could be stashed on injured reserve. Because remember, he's trying to make that transition from college safety at Nebraska to linebacker. So that's something that will take a little bit of time. And I think a year in the weight room could probably help him as far as putting on some pounds and being more equipped to handle things in run support.
And, John, one of the things I talked with Josh earlier in the show was, as much as we talk roster competitions and these final spots near the bottom of the roster. They're up for grabs. Don't put too much weight in what you see tonight, because you look at examples of like Tim Tebow a couple of years ago excelled in the 4th preseason game. He got cut. Emmanuel Acho, Chris McCoy in 2013, they weren't on the team in week 1. Ed Reynolds, remember Ed Reynolds? 90-yard interception return for a touchdown. He gets cut a couple days later. At the end of the day, tonight you have reserves playing the Jets reserves, right?
Yeah, you do. You do, and you're right. I always go back to that Tebow game, and it was Matt Barkley, remember? And everyone was saying, well, who's going to make this team? And Tebow outplayed Matt Barkley, and everyone was saying, well, you got to keep him. You got to keep him. And the bottom line is, well, you don't have to keep him. And they didn't keep either, because neither deserved to be on the team. And you know, to be honest, by the time you're here, and by here I mean the 4th preseason game, you kind of know, if you're the coaching staff, who you like, who you don't like, and that's where we are. So maybe there's one guy who can play so well in this game, he can make a case to say, you can't cut me. But for the most part, as I said, the coaching staff knows who they like and who they want.
Our segment with John McMullen being brought to you by Geno's, the winemaker's choice for 50 years. Visit Gino Pinto on the White Horse Pike in Hamilton, online at genopinto.com. Geno's, the winemaker's choice for 50 years. John McMullen on 97.3 ESPN.com. Eagles Insider also covers the NFL nationally for FanRag Sports. John, a couple of some of the news items that stood out to me today. One of them was the Steelers extending their general manager, Kevin Colbert's contract through the 2020 draft. He's one of those GMs that doesn't get talked about a lot. You know, guys in our area, for example, Howie Roseman, very visible. People really know who he is. But a guy like Colbert is a guy who's just been steadily, consistently doing his job year in and year out. Doesn't do a lot of flashy moves, but consistently gets the job done.
Yeah, I mean, what can you say about the Pittsburgh Steelers organization as a whole? And I think it's defined by continuity. That's what it's about. They've had 3 coaches since 1969, starting with Chuck Noll, and all of them have won Super Bowls with Noll and Bill Cowher and Mike Tomlin. So they like to keep things structured. They like continuity. It's proven to work. You could argue it's the most successful NFL organization in the modern era. And they certainly have a case to say that they're one of the gold standards. Obviously, New England, more recently with 5 Super Bowl titles, is probably ahead. But, hey, they're good, is my point. And they don't get good by being the Cleveland Browns in the same division and constantly changing coaches and constantly changing general managers. That's just not what the Pittsburgh Steelers do. So it's no surprise that they extended the GM, and he obviously deserves it. That's a very good football team.
Seahawks are reportedly shopping guys like Jermaine Kearse and Jeremy Lane. One of the teams might be a possibility to have interest in Jeremy Kearse is reportedly the Browns. Browns, we know they're always thin at the wide receiver position, to say the least, in their franchise's history. What do you think about the possibility of the Browns trying to go get Kearse, and how do you think he would fit into that team?
Well, you're right. They need a lot of help at receiver, and it's interesting from the Browns standpoint because they've been all about collecting assets, sort of going the 76ers route in the NFL as close as you can do it. And at what point do you shift gears and try to get players? Kearse is you know, he's a good player. He's an upgrade from what they have, but certainly he's not a great player. But then again, you're starting Deshaun Kaiser, a rookie quarterback, and you want to give him some weapons, I would think. You don't want to ruin him in his first year, destroy his confidence because he doesn't have players around him. We saw, you know, that's, to me, the most impressive thing about Carson Wentz in his rookie season. The fact that I think he had the worst receiving group in the NFL around him, and it didn't affect him as far as confidence, as far as wavering his belief that he can play in this league. That's not the case with every quarterback. You can see what's happened to Blake Bortles in Jacksonville. So if I'm Cleveland, I want to start putting some skill position players around Deshaun Kaiser.
Also around the NFL today, a bit of a strange story coming out. You know, Fox Sports is now hiring Michael Vick to be part of their NFL analysts, which, I don't know, to me just seems like not that big a deal. You know, a lot of guys get hired for former players, but apparently this is amid animal rights protesters protesting Fox hiring him, and it seems like, you know, and I'm not trying to be dismissive. The crime was horrible, it was horrific, and it's disturbing, but the guy did go to prison. The guy did lose part of his career due to going to prison. You know, is it time for people just to move on, John?
Well, I think it is, and you're talking to a dog lover and a avowed dog. I mean, I love animals, and I despise what Michael Vick did, but at some point, you're right. I mean, you either believe in second chances or you don't, and he paid his debt to society as far as what society defined it as. So I'm not going to say he has no right to make a living, and that's what I said when the Eagles signed him. That's what I say now, that Fox. And I say this with any protester. I mean, at some point, you got to find something else to do. You really, I mean, look at our country and the polarization, and it's just people are so steadfast. Compromise is out the window. Nobody's able to do it. Nobody will even talk about it or mention the word, and I think it's disturbing. And I, as I said, I despise what Michael Vick did, but it's not my job to say he can't work and he can't support his family by trying to get a job. He paid his debt to society.
Ezekiel Elliott hearing has finally come to an end. This saga of behind closed door appeal hearing. Adam Schefter reporting that Mr. Harold Henderson, is under pressure to get it done, like have an announcement by Monday in the case, whether to reduce it or uphold it. What direction do you think the league's going to go in? Do you think this could get reduced? Because we know Henderson, he's gone different ways. Some cases he's upheld it, or, for example, in Greg Hardy's case, he reduced it.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. There's no precedent to rely on where there's no consistency, and that's what I constantly say. The NFL gets in trouble with these issues. A lot of it depends on the negotiation behind the scenes, and it's a complicated one because it's a number of prongs to it. You have the NFLPA, you have Elliott himself, you have Jerry Jones, who claims there's no evidence, you have the NFL that suspended him for 6 games. So you have all these groups coming together and trying to figure out what's going to happen. I've always said this comes down to Ezekiel Elliott and his strategy. What does he want to do? Does he want to fight? If he's steadfast on fighting, I believe he could take it to federal court and get a stay and continue to play while it goes through the system. On the other hand, if he wants to negotiate and say, hey, I'm a 22-year-old guy, let's get this over with, let's knock it down to 4 games, and I'll be ready in the second month of the season, then you might see a reduced suspension. So a lot depends on the negotiations behind the scenes. Ultimately, if he wants to continue to fight it, it will be upheld at 6 games.
John, on the more serious side of life, you know, what's going on in Houston, we know J.J. Watt's been raising money. Well, a few hours ago, he announced that they've broken the $10 million mark.
Wow.
I mean, this is a guy whose original goal, John, was just to get $100,000, and because of his platform and because of who he is, he's been able to make it $10 million in relief efforts. And in some ways, you almost feel like in a situation like this, John, that it almost, I don't know, shall I say, you know, makes you feel good again about, you know, the world we live in, that at least there's some people out there who are willing to put their money where their mouth is in terms of helping people.
Yeah, one of the things that bothers me about how the NFL is covered, and I'm not going to feel sorry for a league that makes $13 billion, but I think there is a lot of unfair coverage. You hear certain players, Ezekiel Elliott being a perfect example, domestic violence in the past, Ray Rice, Greg Hardy, Adrian Peterson. But if you think about how many players in this league do good things, and you look at J.J. Watt, and obviously people are covering it, but nobody talks about it. The vast majority of people in this league, players, are really good people, and they do good things. John Dormouse left as a long snapper, we just know was traded. You know, people loved him for what he did off the field, not because they were enamored with his long snapping ability. And I don't think, obviously, that's just the nature of our world, is that negative things get reported on. But there are a lot of J.J. Watts in the world who go out of their way to do everything possible in a horrible instance like this. And I think people should harp more on that than the few bad apples. And it is a few. If you look at it percentage-wise, there's 53 different players on 32 teams. Do the math. The majority of them don't get in trouble with the NFL commissioner.
John McMullen with us, our 97.3 ESPN Eagles insider, national columnist for FanRagSports.com. You can follow him on Twitter at JF McMullen. And I know, John, tonight I'll be watching those snaps because Lovato, you mentioned him, he hasn't snapped the punter Donnie Jones yet this summer. So let's keep an eye on that tonight. Let's hope that everything goes smoothly. And, yes, some of those roster decisions. Saturday is when that cut-down day takes place. Sunday, when the practice squad, the 10 names on the practice squad, are announced. Thanks, John. Safe travels to you, and we'll look forward to catching up with you tomorrow.
Hey, thank you, guys.
In our segment with John McMullen each day here on the Sports Bashon on 97.3 ESPN, being brought to you by Geno's, the winemaker's choice for 50 years. Visit Gino Pinto on the White Horse Bike in Hamilton. Online at GinoPinto.com. Geno's, the winemaker's choice for 50 years.